Okay, a very fast play Spanish Civil War game by Ian K. I'm a big fan of Ian K and his works, kind of. These are one-page rules, very simple, like it says here, fast play, Spanish Civil War. My 2023 project is getting into the Spanish Civil War. Over the last month or so, I came to a very interesting realization about the country of Spain. It's really important. They punch well above their weight. When you look at the history of Western civilization, Spain is the critical battleground where all kinds of very, very important things happen. It's not always the center of the world, but it's most often that kind of periphery where the real battles are fought. Think about it. Peloponnesian War, Athens and Sparta, next door neighbors. Where did the bulk of the fighting happen? Way over there in the Iberian Peninsula. You look at Rome. Spain played an outsized role in the development of Rome. It was one of the breadbaskets, along with the Nile, I know. But, Spain was very important to the Romans. And then you look at when the Muslim uprising conquered and took a tremendous, they launched their crusade against the Christian lands. They suffered some of their great successes in Spain, and they were stopped cold, kind of at the border of France. Then you have the Reconquista. Then you have the taking of the New World. Then you have the turning point for the defeat of Napoleon. Where did that happen? It was the Peninsular Campaign in Spain. And then you advance the clock another, 150 years, and you're looking at the Spanish Civil War. Once again, we're back in Spain. It's amazing how often we return to this country, and I don't know, I kind of think I might be becoming whatever the Spanish equivalent of a weeb is. By which I mean, instead of, falling in love, being a Western European, Spain's in West, so we don't really have a word for this. I'm kind of fumbling for the description. Instead of being a Westerner that looks to Japan, I'm more of an Anglo-Saxon who looks to Spain, I guess you could say. At any rate, so I'm taking up a very deep interest in the Spanish Civil War. Now, part of this is because I read Peter Kemp's Mine Worth Trouble, which is an excellent book. It's the Spanish Civil War's equivalent of Storm of Steel. If you've read and enjoyed Storm of Steel, I recommend you read Mine Worth Trouble. Published by, who's published by? Something Grove? Man, I can't remember. But it's right here. This is the book that you're looking for on Amazon. And I'll try to remember to put a link in the description. This is the story of a British guy who fought for the nationalists in Spain. And the story of the Spanish Civil War is a very interesting one because there's all kinds of ironic things that happen in this war. I picked up, of course, K, which is this fast play rules. I originally started with A World of Flame, which is inter-war game rules for 1918 to 1939. And the cover is a Spanish Civil War. Oh, here's one of the milicianos. This is the female fighters that fought for the commies, who's now discovering that a renewed interest in maybe being a housewife isn't so bad after all. But this rule set is not just for the Spanish Civil War. Although the difficulty that I have with this rule set is that it is designed more for 15, 20, 28 millimeter figures. If we look at the scenario in the back, it's really kind of a mini campaign for taking. This is the table. Day 1, you take the ridge. Day 2, you fight. There's a counterattack to retake it. And then day 3, these guys are trying to take the second ridge, trying to reach this road over here. Now, the orders of battle for this particular scenario are a good indication of the kind of numbers that you need. And here, we've talked about this before. Hey, Russian Civil War, right? 1918, 1920, right? We're in that era. Warlord China. The British Civil War, a very British Civil War. And like the British Civil War, just if I may pause for a moment before we get to the orders of battle, like the very British Civil War, this stuff is in part an excuse for me to grind my own political axes. I tend, when there's a breakdown and I have to decide which side to choose, I tend to pick the one that's shooting at the communists. They're the good guys. And more often than not, that means that I'm pulling for the side with the monarchists on it. Hey, I'm a Catholic. That's kind of what we do. Be that as it may, let's circle back around. So I just want to mention that, kind of wear my heart on my sleeve, let you know where I'm coming from, tell you my biases, and if that scares you off, then, go with God's blessing. Go with my blessing. Orders of battle for this particular campaign, mini campaign, if you will, you're looking at, on the side of the nationalists, about 40 figures. Each of these companies has an officer, a light machine gun, 8 riflemen, and then we got about 10 kind of standard bearers, runners, medics, blah, 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 blah. On the other side, you've got about 60 to 80 guys. I think they're doing the attacking, so of course they're going to outnumber. The attackers generally are going to outnumber the defenders, particularly when the defenders are in a good, solid defending point. That's kind of an interesting rule set, but again, and reinforcements come on, but again, not quite the scale that I'm looking for, because I'm looking for something more on the operational level. I would like to be able to use platoons, although, again, remember we talked about how there's a lot of irony in this era. On the one side, the platoons were called sections, and the sections were called pelotons or platoons. So you have to deal with the fact that a platoon, depending on which side of the fight you're talking about, could represent, a small or a large unit. Gets really interesting. Let me pause for a moment now and just talk a little bit about the history and some of the interesting ironies that are involved. And the great part about it is, because you've got a lot of different forces, and you've even got like civil wars within the Civil War, there's a lot of different factions within the two major factions. Now, we all know that the two major factions are the fascists and the communists. That's kind of how we characterize it. Or the Republicans, who were the communists, and the fascists, who came to be called the nationalists. Now, interestingly enough, many of the people who fought for the republics, really their sympathies lied with a monarchy. They were monarchists, but they trusted the commies. They believed that the commies, if they won the battle, they won the fight for Spain, they would give them their independence. The Basque separatists, for example. This is, again, it's the commies have only been around for about 20 years, depending on how you measure it. So they didn't know, you can't really trust them. What they did know is that you can't trust the nationalists, because they had been trusting them for a long time. So oddly enough, generally monarchist people sided with the anti-monarchists. At the same time, you've got these, about 15 years before the Civil War, the Spanish military, they were involved in Moroccan Spain, the Spanish Morocco, and Morocco was divided. We're kind of at the tail end of the colonial period. So the Morocco was divided between the French and the Spanish Morocco. And the nationalist forces, we should just call it the Spanish forces, about 10, 15 years beforehand, had put down a huge uprising of the Muslims in Africa. When the war broke out, the general who took command of the forces in Spain, he was a nationalist. He went to the locals in Morocco and said, hey, I'll make you a deal. If you come fight for Spain, I can give you a target-rich environment, and I can point you at a whole bunch of Spaniards that you can kill. And a lot of Moroccans said, whoa, I get to kill Spaniards? Where do I sign up? And the nationalists said, well, hold on. You have to kill the Spaniards that we point you at, okay? And a lot of the Spaniards they pointed the Moroccans at were not actually Spaniards. They were a mix of French and Russian and even Americans and British guys that signed up to fight for the Republicans, because they really didn't like monarchies, and for a variety of reasons. Again, there were factions within the Republicans. The Republicans had anarchists, and they had Trotskyites, and they had Stalinists, and lots of different factions within that. And so even here, you can see the kind of blue-shirted, jumpsuited guys here fighting for the nationalists. So you've got this weird agglomeration, and at a couple of points during the Spanish Civil War, the guys fighting for the Republicans had shooting matches of their own. When it became clear who was going to be the top dog at the end of the war, the guys who were not top dogs took that as an opportunity to fight. Likewise, you had a couple of different forces. You had militias that had formed in response to the communist violence before the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War. One of them were called the Phalangists, and one was called the Requetes. And the Requetes supported, these were both monarchists, but they supported different monarchies. One supported the reintroduction of the Bourbon kings. That would be, they wanted to put somebody named Carl. They were the Carlists. And then you had the Phalangists, who wanted to put the king who had most recently been deposed back on the throne. So which monarchist was gonna win? Well, let's beat up the commies first, and then we'll figure that out. And whichever side loses, and it turns out historically the Carlists, they were really brave. They did the bulk of the fighting early. They took a lot of losses, and by the time the war was about half over, they didn't have the power to take control. They got subsumed into the Phalangists. So you had, and then again, you still have your Army of Africa with your Moroccans who were fighting, and then you had a foreign legion, which was composed of all kinds of adventurers from around the world who either they were deep in debt or they, were prisoners who were given a choice. hey, do you want to go, they exiles from their country, or just, some guys just want to have an adventure. And there were two ways to do it. One is to go sign up for the French, one was to sign up for the Spanish. So you have all these really interesting little forces kind of at play on both sides of the conflict. And there's a lot of really interesting things going on in the Spanish Civil War. And I highly recommend, for your sake, that you take a look at it as this really interesting hotbed of conflict on the cusp of World War II. And I'll point out one more thing that I think kind of gets lost in the discussions as we bring our own modern views and interpretations to the events of the day. Both sets of Spaniards, the nationalists and the Republicans, found themselves in a tie. It was a very evenly matched fight, and they didn't really want to call on outside help. This is a Spanish thing. Can we just leave it to the Spanish? But because of the stakes involved, because of the opportunity for belligerents who knew they were about to go to war, Russia and Germany, they were lining up. They were building up their forces. They were getting ready for that. They saw the Spanish Civil War as a cauldron, a testing ground for their technology. And at least in the case of the Germans, there was a little bit of reluctance early on. Look, I don't want to throw my resources at the nationalists because I think they're going to lose. The nationalists said, look, we need your help. And then when the Germans said, yeah, we're going to help you out, and the Russians as well, when they said, we'll help our respective side, but all of that help, all those troops and all of those resources, all the money comes with strings attached. In the case of the communists, one of the big strings was, what's it going to cost? About half, right? They went full Joker, and actually it took like all of the gold of Spain. I think like 3/4 of the Spanish gold reserves wound up in Moscow. About half would have been nice as far as the Spaniards are concerned. But along with that price, there comes the issue of control. And the Germans were very upset about the fact that the nationalists fought a war of attrition. They fought a very static, grinding, safe, one town at a time kind of war, where the Germans wanted to see if this blitzkrieg thing would work. And it wasn't until late in the war that they got their way, and they forced Franco. They said, look, either you try to use our tactics or you ain't getting one more Deutschmark. And Franco had to give in, and it worked out actually pretty well for him. And likewise, the communists said, listen, we're not going to give you all the support unless you put our boys in charge, because our boys just got done fighting a civil war of our own. Trust us, we know how this stuff is done. And if you allow our advisors to take command roles, it's going to go better for you. And so both sets of Spanish were right in the sense of, we don't want this outside control, but they were also wrong in the sense that, bring in the experts because it's going to go better for you in the long run. As it turned out, that wasn't true in the case of the Italians. They came in on the side of the nationalists, and the bodies helped, but they really punched well below their weight. That's enough of the history for now. I'm just trying to sell you on the idea of big adventure, big fun, a lot of untested technologies, wild swings and whether they work or not. Let's now go to the tape. I am going to be using, now E&K is with Irregular Miniatures, and the way you start with Irregular Miniatures, at least the way I've found that works, you start with the battle packs. Ready-made battle packs, one Republican, one nationalist. And that makes sense, right? Republicans on the left, nationalists on the right. Let's take a look. Now, these are on the website described as a suitable mix for each force. Let's take a look at what you get in the Republican bag. And this is exactly what it says on the tin. It's about $15, I want to say. These are 2mm figures. And via the magic of editing, we can break down exactly what you get for the Republicans. And as you can see, it's heavy on the infantry. You get 6 leader bases. That's what these little discs are right here. They got a group of about 4 leaders on it. And it's 2mm. So what do you expect? This is the best I can do to show you. You do get a total of, I think I was shorted 1 squad, or I guess you could call it a section of infantry. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. And then you get 6 machine guns and 6 mortar teams. You get 6 tanks. And then look at this, actual cavalry. So I've got infantry, cavalry, and artillery. For the cavalry, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 horseback mounted guys. You get 1 little car, 6 tanks. And I got to be honest with you, I don't know what these are. Are they BT5s? Are these like the Renault tanks? They're super tiny. And then you get a total of 8 pieces of artillery. You get 4 of the big, these are kind of fork trailer like howitzers. I think these are big enough you can kind of see them pointing up at the sky. And then you get 4 of these more little guys. There you go. So that's more like an anti-tank gun, I think. That's what that looks like to me. And then, yes, wow, it's kind of zooming in pretty good. Let's see if we can zoom in on the tank. Yeah, look at that adorable little fella. Isn't she cute? Now, one of the reasons I'm doing this is because I want to know what I got, so I know what I got to order, because I am going to be painting these in like a tan color. I'm going to be painting the Nationalists in a green, or maybe vice versa. What I want to do is not so much prepare a Spanish Civil War set of 2mm forces, but I do want to use them for a variety of conflicts. I may want to do some red versus white Russians. I may want to do some Chinese warlord, and we can do that here. I will be using the standard 1-inch bases, which means, what do? Do we put 2 tanks on this? And I gotta be honest with you, if we compare these two, these look like tankettes, man. They look really small. So one of the things I'm gonna be interested in is when I buy the 2mm, the proper tanks, your BT5s, what else we got? Even like the CV33s, those are the little mini tankettes. The Renault FT17. That may be what this is, but the Renault FT17 was a World War I tank. I think it's going to be bigger, beefier, and blockier. The French gave a bunch of their old and outdated equipment to the Republicans. What else might they have? They might have, I think that's about it. They had the lead. Oh, no. They will have the T-26s, the Soviet Union light tanks. I think that's probably what these are supposed to be. We'll know when I order some specifically. The nice thing about Irregular Miniatures is, even if you can't tell what it is, we'll see if this shows up. See the little 2 there? That's the product code. And the IBKW2 is for the machine gun teams. Those are allied, and then here's what the mortar teams look like. You can kind of see there's a couple little clusters of guys there. And I don't know, man. Once I get it painted up, it'd be easier. But the mortar teams are number upside down. Oh, it's upside down. He did the 3 upside down. Wait a minute. Oh, there we go. There's the 3. So you can kind of tell which order code that is. And then again, the leader base is going to be number 4. So there you go. That's what you get for about $15. And I will be mounting, I think we're going to put 2 tanks. Maybe we'll do 3 tanks per base, because you don't need a whole lot of tanks. We may wind up doing 2 sets of the actual horseback-mounted cavalry. And then I think, in all likelihood, we may wind up going with a full 2 squads per base and calling it a platoon, and then a group of like 3 or 4 bases. We'll go with maybe 1 leader. We'll have to figure out exactly what our ratios are. But that's going to give us a good, solid base on which to build our forces. Now let's take a look at the Nationalists. And as you can see, we do have 60 squads, 6 leader bases, 6 HQ, if you will. We've got 6 machine guns and 6 mortar teams. Well, it's actually 12 teams, but 6 bases. We got 6 tanks. We've got 2, 4, 6, 8 cavalry. And these figures, all the infantry and the horse-mounted cavalry, the little armored car here, which we can use for running like messages around. Isn't he cute? Maybe we should do some gas lands in 2mm. Wouldn't that be fun? Good luck with that template. And then we've got the same number of artillery. We've got 4 bases of the big artillery and 4 bases of the small. But I pulled out the small artillery for the Republicans because I think it's worth taking a look. The one you see here on the right is a split tail, and the one on the left here is kind of a monotail. You can, well, they're facing in opposite directions here. Let me get them so they're actually shooting in the same direction there. And we'll kind of rotate them so you can see that the Nationalist anti-tank gun here, I don't know if that's showing up as well as I'd hoped, is a little bit fatter, so it's different. So although the mix is the same, you do get some slightly different figures. In fact, if we take a look at these tanks, the tank here, oh boy, let me make sure I get this right. The tank here on my index finger will be the Nationalist, and the tank here on my, I guess it's a little glossy there, a little sweaty. The tank here on my middle finger will be for the Republicans. So the one on your right is a little taller, and the one on your left has the turret a little further forward. So we do have 2 separate molds for the tank. Even though the force mix is the same, you get a little bit of variety. I'll put these up. JohnMollison.com is my blog. I'll write all these up, and I'll give you that force mix in written format so you can refer to that moving forward in the future. As I said, I don't know exactly which tank this is. I'm not that well versed in the fighting vehicles of the era. I don't pay a whole lot of attention to World War II stuff because my culture drowns in it, and the hobby has enough of that. It's screaming into a very crowded room. Dialing the clock back a couple of decades gives us some new, interesting avenues to explore. And it also, in a way, even though, as I said earlier, I'm kind of like a Spanish weeb. I don't know what the Spanish word for weeb is. If you know, let me know down in the comments. We tend to gravitate towards those conflicts that have a great deal of personal import to us. If you are a member of the former British Empire, if you are part of, Anzac, you're going to be drawn, your patrimony, your lineage, your plebiscite, the people that you relate to, their ancestors fought. Even if your direct ancestor didn't fight in the Napoleonic Wars, you will tend to gravitate towards the wars in which your ancestors fought. And maybe as a way of doing homage to the men they fought, you will collect forces for the men they fought. There are a lot of Yankees who collect Confederate armies. There are a lot of Confederates, sons of the Confederacy, who collect Yankee armies. It's a way of doing homage not just to your fathers, but to your brothers and your cousins. And I view the Spaniards, even though I'm not of direct Spanish descent, I do view them as my cousin, being of Western European descent. And I just wanted to take a moment to remind you that there's no shame in honoring your mother and father. If you gravitate towards those conflicts that your ancestors fought in, you're not doing anything wrong. You don't need to feel guilty about not being a fan of conflicts that don't have a lot of impact on your lineage. Now they do, right? Because we live on a very small world. And so even something like the War of the Flowers, even some of the pre-contact wars can have a direct influence on your life. But there is a separation there, right? The closer you are to it, the more drawn to it you are, the more likely you are to wargame in that era. Don't be ashamed of that. Embrace it. You're not doing anything wrong. Other guys, there's a lot of guys who maybe their ancestors were what the Mexicans call indignos. They were indigenous people who fought in the War of the Flowers. I think that's one of the Aztec wars, or even just the pre-contact, right? The wars of the Aztecs and the Tlaxcalans. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right. The pre-contact Native Americans. We did some Hawaiian on Hawaiian fights here on the channel. Good stuff. I live in Hawaii. This has a direct influence. Some of my best friends have ancestors that fought in those wars. And, I participated, I studied, and I did some tribal. It's a great game for that. And I played that in part just to learn more about my friend's lineage. It's okay to wargame other people's stuff. Whatever you want to do. And so this is our kind of moment of validation. Whatever you're doing fine. Don't let anybody shame you into playing an era that you're not fully interested in. All right, so just kind of thoughts on the Spanish Civil War today, what you can expect from Irregular Miniatures, what you can expect from the channel. As I record this, I still need to place an order. They're way over in Britbong land, so it's going to take several weeks for that order to get here. The Spanish Civil War is kind of far down in the queue for me, so we're still looking at the middle to the late part of the year before we get any of these games on the table. One last thought: I did order Bob Cordery's Arriba España, and I think that's the set of rules we're going to start with because it's written for this kind of more operational level where each 1-inch square. Now he's got his whole portable war game, which is kind of a board game with a grid. Yeah, we don't do board games here on the channel. We do miniature war games. So we're going to be doing with full maps, and we're going to kind of interpret it as best we can. But I think it's going to work really well for kind of doing more of that moving around the countryside, launching your platoons at the right place. It might even be brigade level. Like you're commanding a division with multiple brigades. I've just begun to dip my toes into this. Join me on this journey in our next episode of Spanish Civil War Explorations. And if you take exception to any of my analysis of this conflict or the history involved, then go ahead, put some comments down in the section. But this gets, there are real world ramifications right now. So I'm going to remind you, you got to be respectful down there. All right. Until next time, I'm praying for you.